I want to talk a bit about my experience in retreat this winter, and yeah, well, I'll dive right into it. With mindfulness of the body, I felt like I got a real good sense of it being impermanent, the body being impermanent, the body being foul, in the nature of dukkha, and really some feeling of it being selfless, or not being the place I'm going to find the self of the person, and also not really having an essence of its own, as like the body itself cannot be found, it is imputed. Um, with the impermanence of the body, I thought a lot about just how I experienced gross impermanence, and a lot of that just is simply not possible without it having changing moment by moment. I I remember being a little toddler in diapers, putting my hand on the ground to stabilize myself, and I didn't change into this overnight, or on I didn't change in increments on New Year's Day or on my birthday, and and also, of course, I'm getting a better sense of, and this body and that toddler's body are not the same body, but they are in the same continuum, and it's changing gradually, moment by moment. Um, and really got a sense of the foulness of the body with, well, I'm going to use a syllogism that the body is foul because it is composed of, contains, and produces foul substances. And I was talking with one of the people that did the retreat from afar, who's a doctor, and he said he had a little difficulty with the meditation on the foulness of the body because he operates and he sees a liver and it's like it's an amazing thing, you know? So from that point of view, you might see each part of the body as amazing, you know, in its function and its complexity and all. But the second two parts of that reason in that syllogism, it contains and produces foul substances. So I think everybody's gonna, even him, he said, yeah, well, poop and pee, that's foul. So I really was able to get some feeling of that, but with anything that you learn in a way that you're trying to counter a wrong view that you already hold, you got to go over this time and time again to really erode that previous wrong view. And so I may have gained some intellectual understanding on the body, but that how much it affects my daily outlook and my daily activities is based on how much I go over it over and over again and meditate on it, go through the reasons. So actually, I'm not going to share, I want to not take too long with the body, so I'm not going to share all the syllogisms that I came up with or all the reasons. Well, maybe I'll go into the syllogisms a little bit. So let's see, for dukkha, the subject, the body, is in the nature of dukkha because it is subject to aging, sickness, and death. Those are all pretty unsatisfactory, and they can be downright painful, downright suffering. So I have no problem recognizing that the body can be a source of suffering. But then there's this thought can always come up, you know, some days, well, I'm doing fine right now. Well, that's not going to last, and so that's unsatisfactory, you know. Yeah. So I felt like I did pretty good, and I got a lot out of that. And I had written a one for the body being selfless, a syllogism, and Venerable Seppel pointed out that my reason was contained in my predicate. So I changed it a bit. The subject, the body, is selfless because it is composed of atoms, none of which is an inherent essence or self. And everything that's composed of atoms is itself selfless, unless you could call those atoms the self, and you can't, because the atoms in this body are, well, some of the guesstimates with modern science are that hydrogen is maybe 13.7 billion years old, and the other stuff is maybe a little younger. But it's a lot older than our planet, the atoms that make up the molecules in our body. And if you took all the atoms away, there is nothing else that is part of the body that you could call a self. There's not something else there that you could call a self. You could call an essence of the body itself. All of those atoms, their time spent in the body is insignificant on the scale of their lifespan or their time that they exist. And also, none of them can be called a self of the person. So I found going over this kind of thing pretty convincing for me about seeing that the self of a person cannot be found in the body. And it felt pretty strong, but there's still this concern for the experiencer of the body. Very strong sense of my body, mine. And I have limited control over this body, and yet I still call it mine. I cannot prevent its aging. I cannot prevent most sicknesses, And once it's sick, I cannot prevent its death. I do have some control. I can move my limbs. I can open and close my eyes. I can talk. I can eat and lay down, walk, many things. And I can't do these things without this body. I can't have the experiences of sense consciousness, of the physical sense consciousnesses without this body. And when this body is harmed, I experience pain. So there's this strong sense of an owner, an owner or experience of this body. And when I spent time being mindful of feelings, this was very much coming up for me, that the physical feelings are an aspect of the experience of this body, this pleasant, unpleasant, that even if I don't find a self in the body, if there's a self, there's this feeling of self, and there's this feeling that there's this self has to deal with what the body has to go through. And I also try to get clear in my mind that what we call bodily feelings or physical feelings are called that because they're related to the body and they're related to the experience of the body and physicality. But they are mental factor and they're not physical. So if I have a pain in my arm, really there's a sensation in the arm of some sort, and I'm having a feeling, the tactile consciousness is having a feeling involved with that. And then immediately the mental consciousness is making a hoo-ha about it. I found it helpful to watch a feeling. This is one of the things Bhikkhu Analayo mentioned, and I think it was mentioned in some of the other literatures too, is to watch a feeling before reacting to it. Watch it and watch the urge arise to react to it. So I have an itch, and I recognize that, and I recognize that I want to scratch that itch, and then being aware of that and contemplating that a little before scratching it. It's not trying to be an ascetic practice. Or the same with recognizing a unpleasantness in my body, an unpleasant feeling arising related to my sitting posture, and being aware of that, being aware of the the desire or the urge or craving to shift before I shift, rather than just, moving and not even being aware that I did it. I found that helpful, but I need to spend a lot more time with feeling, actually. I need to spend a lot more time with the mindfulness of feeling. But I do recognize that feelings change and are impermanent, and thus cannot be a permanent self. They arise due to causes and conditions, and so they are thus not an independent, autonomous self. And here again, as with the body, I can accept that feelings are not a self or an I or autonomous, but I have a strong attachment to a sense of an experience or dealing with these feelings, greatly affected by the experience of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feelings. Often very concerned about the unpleasant feelings, and often craving the pleasant feelings. So and then with primary consciousnesses, they're dependent on phenomena, and so can also not be an inherently existent self. They cannot be an independent, autonomous self. Yeah, except that's not how I feel at all. I mean, oftentimes I have the feeling that the sense consciousnesses are like a tool of the mental consciousness. Okay, visual consciousness, what do you see? So it sees green, gray, brown, a certain shape. That's a tree. I go to a conceptual discrimination immediately, along with lots of commentary. And so, yeah, that's a ponderosa pine or a white pine or whatever. Yeah, it's like I don't just see color and shape or just hear sound waves. I jump right to the mental consciousness, right to the conceptual. And this sense of I, for me, seems very rooted in, very centered in the mental consciousness. So when I practice mindfulness of the phenomena, I read a few books on mental factors, going over it again and again, mind and mental factors. And I tried to recognize different mental factors as they would rise in my mind, memorize some of the lists and look for them and see how they relate to each other, what things cause them to arise, looking at what affects the developing of good qualities or virtuous qualities, and what kind of antidotes are most effective for me with the non-virtuous ones. And I spend a lot of time trying to watch the mind. I don't have the greatest concentration, so I spend a bit of time trying to get better concentration, better mindfulness, looking at those 5 object ascertaining mental factors and how they really reinforce each other, and thinking about them, thinking about the aspiration and appreciation, mindfulness, concentration in order to develop wisdom. And I looked at the first 4 a lot just to be able to try and help my concentration and bring my mind back repeatedly to the object. And so I was able to get a little better with that for a while, and I was able to sit and try to experience the mind as clear and knowing without paying much attention to the mental proliferations that are coming up. And I did get a bit of a sense of the mind as clear and knowing. And I experienced a few days where the mind was, in a few sessions where the mind was quieter and more manageable. And I felt a bit, or I could disassociate myself with some of the mental chatter. And I really got to see how so much of the mental proliferations in my mind are related to identity for me. About things that are related to I, tied to a personal identity in the sense of me and mine. Um, and this is not only what's coming up on the cushion, but through my day-to-day with distractions and stuff. Thinking about, experiences I've had. That's all about part of my identity. And then also the things that have this sense of I and what the I relates to, what the I enjoys and uses and is averse to. And the context that this self exists within, to see that it's all just, so much of it is just weaving a story around me, around my sense of I. And as I said at the end of the retreat, at the sharing, I woke up one morning where my mind was rather quiet and calm for a little bit. And I was aware that it was quiet for a few moments before the mental proliferations really started to come to the front. And then I heard Bhikkhu Inalio's voice say, "This is dukkha." And that was really what I had been thinking about for a couple of days about the mental proliferations. I think that's why it came up that way. I've been really just kind of trying not to feel centered in them, but centered more in just experiencing and watching them, and seeing them as just part of samsara, and me weaving my own samsara. And there was a little bit of a time there when I was doing that, trying to see the mind as much trying to see an experience, or really, where I was thinking, am I just reifying this sense of self with this? And really, I think now I was just recognizing that that's where it's strongest for me, in that sense of I. I see all this moments of awareness as if there is an experiencer, when really it's just these moments of experience, and all these things coming together to create that. And I talked to one of the retreatants from afar with our closing thing on the Zoom, and somebody pretty much had said, with their sharing, that they had gone through, and it's very much like what I'm saying. They said, I could see the body, I could accept the body as not a self. I could accept the feelings are not a self. I could even, accept that the mental factors and things are not a self, or even the sense consciousnesses. But I have this feeling that I experience. I am there, and you can't tell me that's not there. And so I responded to pretty much what I've been reminding myself, that there is a self that exists conventionally, imputed, but it's changing moment by moment. It's not inherently existent. It's changing moment by moment. It's dependent on what it's conscious of. It's dependent on its previous moment and its continuity. And it's merely imputed on an ever-changing basis that's changing moment by moment. Even its basis is imputed upon its basis. And so in a funny way, that we're taught that there's a self that does exist conventionally, but we see it as existing in a way that it doesn't exist. It exists merely imputed, and we see it as if it's inherently existent. And to recognize To recognize the true nature of things is said to be very subtle. To recognize emptiness. And yet, the difference between these two kinds of self are night and day. They're totally opposite, and we mix them. There's this thing that doesn't exist that we see as solid and inherently existent, and it exists empty of inherent existence. And somehow we mix these two totally different things, and to pry them apart is so subtle. I'm a long ways from having any realizations on regarding emptiness or even subtle impermanence. I think I did have a very fruitful retreat, though, just trying to spend some time experiencing what's going on in my mind and looking at things and just trying to take time to really have the time to contemplate these things. So I just wanted to share that, but there's no real conclusion except that we just keep practicing.